Well, welcome to those who are listening live with us or listening on podcast to today's Truett Church Network webinar and event. Our guest today is the newly minted Reverend Dr. Jack Bodenhamer, who runs the Ministry Connections office for us that deals with placement here at Truett Seminary. And really did just finished his D-Min work at Truett and will be hooded here in a few weeks. Jack, welcome.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. And although we are only separated by mere feet, doing this in different offices is probably the best idea.
I think it is. I do think it works well. Jack and I visit oftentimes throughout every day because of our job and friendship, but we're trying to be professional like we're official guests here today.
That's right.
This is the first of a series of 4 visits we'll be having with various faculty and staff at Truett Seminary over Advent that we're calling Advent Conversations. And each week we'll get together and just talk about the theme of Advent that week of hope and joy and love and peace. Perhaps for those preaching and leading and teaching those themes during Advent, provide some encouragement, perhaps some stories. But really for all of us, as we seek to approach the birth of Jesus at Christmas, some encouragement that we all can use in our lives. So today we are talking about hope. And so, sorry, I forgot for a minute. We are talking about this first week of hope. And so we're going to ask really the same questions each time. And so, Jack, help us understand hope from a biblical perspective. What is the biblical witness of hope as you understand it?
Yeah. As I begin thinking about biblical witness for hope, the great song lyric, our hope rests on nothing less but Jesus Christ and his righteousness, right? If we're going to do the Cliff Notes version of hope in the Bible, it's that. It's the life, death, resurrection, ascension, and the promised return of Jesus. If we were going to look at a more perhaps robust idea of hope throughout the entirety of the Bible, I think it centers on covenant relationship with God, allows us to live in expectation that there's something more, that there's something better, and that's hope. And that throughout the story of Israel, through its history and through the prophets, through the testimony of the Psalms, into the New Testament and the church in our modern era, it is those who are in covenant relationship with God who have hope, that their hope is beyond kind of the sensory into this very divine gift. For me, that's really important distinction. And also, I think it's important to think about how it's written about throughout the Bible. But importantly, in Romans 8, the Apostle Paul writes about salvation and the hope of Jesus Christ. And he writes that hope that is seen is no hope at all. That for who hopes in what he already has. But if we hope for what we do not have, we will wait patiently for it. I think that's a really important nuance of hope, is that it's an act of faith, that it is not seen, it's not perceived, it is something that we hold on to.
So that's what you mean beyond the sensory, beyond what can be, literally our senses can perceive, there's something else there.
Yeah, and it has to be, right? By definition, what Paul is telling us is by definition, it has to be something bigger than this. In a grander picture. And I do think that's part of where culturally we get this wrong, that I do think there's this innate God birth thing in humanity that holds on to hope, and that we understand hope in a really early age, and it's part of who we are. I think we're entering Advent and Christmas time, and kids understand what it means to hope that there will be Christmas gifts under a tree. Right? Maybe they hope because they've been told there's going to be Christmas trees, maybe, or a Christmas present under the tree, or maybe just they remember the past and there were presents under there. And so whether it's story that they're being told or it's history that they're latching onto, they hope there's presents under the tree. That's a simple concept. And we see this play out, I think, in just in the lives of adults as well as we understand what it is to hope. And this is why things like political parties and political identities gain such steam, because we see this world, we know there's need for it to be better. And so we start putting our trust and hope in things that maybe can offer us a promise of something better. And that's where I think the feelings of people get so ratcheted up politically or in any number of areas, because hope is innate, but we can place it in really cheap and small things compared to the divine.
Yeah. So, I mean, you just answered that, I think, to some extent, but maybe we want to say more. And so what is challenging about hope? So you said hope is innate. I agree with that. But also despair is rampant. Anxiety is rampant. Depression is rampant. So what is challenging about hope?
Yeah. I mean, short answer, everything. And you're exactly right. I especially think in just the moment we are sociologically, culturally, we see all of these mental health issues on the rise, that depression is real, the lack of hope is in abundance. And so we have to maybe reverse engineer and ask ourselves why. And there's a lot of reasons, and you can't pare that down. But I think one of the reasons for the lack of hope broadly is that it's unrealized. That if we had it, it would be easy. And that if we could see it, if we could hear it, if we could feel it, then we would know. And as an act of faith, hope is challenging beyond all those things, because if it's unrealized, it's also counterintuitive. That if everything that I see, everything that I hear, everything that I feel in my very bones tells me life is this way, the world is this way, it's really counterintuitive to hold on to something that says the opposite. That says, hey, this world is broken and it's getting more broken. You watch the news, man. I watched the news this morning and was brought to literal tears of a parade that was a guy just ran through a parade in his car, and in West Texas there was a crash with band kids, and you start paying attention. Everything you see leads us to think the world is broken and it's getting more broken. And yet the gospel message of a Christ that ascended and is returning to renew and restore and to heal and to make new, in Romans 8, all creation is yearning for this. That is counterintuitive to everything I'm just encapsulated in my society. And that is really, really challenging. And lastly, I think hope is in short supply because of we tend to be short-sighted. That hope requires perseverance. And there's a lot the Apostle Paul talks about with perseverance and character and hope. And but we need to be mindful that we live in a society that tells us immediate gratification or just immediate resolution. Even if it's bad, at least I know. And hope says, no, we're just going to keep going. We're just going to keep going, and we serve a God that does hear us when we cry. He hears Israel and the Hebrew people in Egypt, and he hears them in the time of Judges, and he hears them over and over and over again. In the lament Psalms, it is crying out to a God that hears. We have a God that comes and dwells among us because he loves us so much, and the God that's coming back. But that's perpetually for us not realized. It's not seen. And it calls for perseverance. And that makes it a really difficult quality to hold on to.
Which is part of I always felt preaching the first week of Advent was so difficult because you're just on the heels of Thanksgiving. Everyone's ready to do Christmas. Everyone's put up decorations and trees. and you've got to call them back to, you've got to name this and call it back, that we're not living for this earthly, sort of horizontal celebration. We're hoping, and our hope is more, but it needs to be named. And that's part of why we gather for worship. It's part of why we keep coming back. We realize in part, I think, it's ultimately unrealized, but we get a taste, we get a little piece.
We see through a glass dimly lit, right?
There you go.
Something biblical, right?
Yeah, very good. Well, you are a doctor, and so that's showing that off. All right, when you think hope, what story comes to mind? You have a story of hope that comes to mind this time of year.
Yeah, and it's actually a deeply personal one, so I don't know how many pastors can steal this for your sermon. So if you want to, good luck, and hats off to you. But I've actually been thinking about this for quite some time, and I haven't put pen to paper yet because it's still in this kind of nebulous space in my brain. But several years ago, I preached the Tuesday before Thanksgiving at Chapel Truett, and I told basically this kind of lament to lost tradition of, I grew up in a house like many people where Thanksgiving really was all about being together. There wasn't distractions of presents and gifts and that sort of thing. And we were in the kitchen together. We were outside playing touch football together. We were watching football together. We gathered around the table. We ate, we prayed, we thanked God for just this togetherness. And through death and sickness, that had been lost for me, that you wake up one morning and you're the eldest generation. And there's no place to go home to that's not your home. And so I told this story of lament to that congregation in the Truett Chapel of being in a Whataburger in small town Texas, because that's the only place that's open when you spring your 95-plus-year-old grandmother from the nursing home. And you're sitting there in that room, you're surrounded by people who are lonely and never would have imagined this is my ideal Thanksgiving lunch at Whataburger. And you're talking in loops because I have a not yet 2-year-old son and a 95-year-old grandmother with dementia. And those loops for my son are eat your burger, finish your lunch, you can eat your cookie when you're done with your lunch. Eat your burger, finish your lunch, you can have your cookie when you're done with your lunch. And likewise with my grandmother, whose dementia was slowly kind of taking away her faculties, it was the loop that those folks often get in of, I like the place I live, my nurses are great, the food is good. I like the place I live, the food is good. And so we having this discussion about loops in conversation in a very sad venue. The day culminates with a visit to the cemetery where we pay our respects to those, and all is lost. And there is no sense of joy, of tradition, of holiday, and it's gone, and it's not coming back.
Yeah.
And in those moments, you learn to have some language about that, but it's still a language of mourning and loss. But then last year, in the midst of a global pandemic where we've seen hundreds of thousands of Americans die, millions worldwide, it was a special dispensation from the hospital to allow me to go downstairs, across the parking lot, through the drive-through of Whataburger, to bring my meal back up into a dimly lit room, with the parade playing softly in the background, with a bundle of new life in a crib next to my love. There's hope.
Yeah.
There's life restored. There's the renewal. There's the healing. There's the restoration. There is just this small snippet. And in the grand scheme of things, this is tiny, right? We're talking about traditions of a holiday. That's not saving the world. But what I think is these small moments of hope restored, life renewed, it points to the grander picture of a God that sits on a throne. That the Revelation 21 vision, that there is no more sorrow, there is no more tears, there is no more sickness, there is no death. And he who's sitting on the throne says, behold, I'm making all things new. Man, in that moment, eating that second Whataburger lunch in a hospital, that was all things new.
Yeah.
And it points to this grander vision of a God that hears us when we cry. He heard Israel. He hears us now. And that little snippet, that little episode of hope allows me to draw my eyes up and think about where the grander hope lies and where restoration and healing really comes from. It demands a wider vision for me.
That's a good word. That's a good word. I won't eat Whataburger the same. Thank you for that story. I know that's not easy to share, and appreciate you sharing that with us. So if you had a word of encouragement, of hope that the church needs to hear today, that pastors need to hear today, how would you encourage us? You already have. What's another word?
Yeah. Oh man. We are a people of hope. It's just that. It's hope exists. That despite what you feel, you see, you hear, there's not been a decision, especially for pastors. There's just not been a decision you've made in the last 2 years that's been right. And you've caught it on every side. And we were just at the convention, and you hear that story over and over again. And so it may just seem like there is no hope, but there is. Yeah. And we are a people of hope because we are those in covenant relationship with God, a God that hears us when we cry, a God that is present among us in the feeling of the Holy Spirit. I was really drawn to my favorite song we'll sing during this time of the year. And it's Longfellow's line, right? That God is not dead. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill toward men. We need to be a people of hope. I think the world desperately needs the church to live in a place for hope. Not Pollyanna, that all is okay and our head is in the sand, but true hope recognizes all the outside influences and says, no, there's still one who hears us. There's still one who's present with us. There's still one who's coming back for us. There's still one that is making all things new. And as his covenant people, hope informs all that we do. The way we worship, the way we disciple one another, the way we evangelize. It's really hard to evangelize if you have no hope. Because you know who else doesn't have hope? Everybody. There's just the world. And so we become a vision of something worth having when we live with the kind of hope that restores sight to the blind, that frees the oppressed, that engages in justice, the ones that love when no one else does. That's the vision of hope that God sends for us. And when we're the people of hope, God does big things. And to live that way, that's the challenge. And if you're sitting there and you're maybe in a dark place, you're going, shut up, Jack, I'm trying. and you hear me say, I get it. I know. Lament is very good. And it is an act that we've lost in the church in large part. But I never want us to take our eyes so focused on lament that we miss out that we are a people of hope. And that's transformative, I think.
Man, that's a good closing word for us and a word of encouragement. Thank you for your time. We're filming this in Thanksgiving week, and we have a lot going on. But I appreciate you sitting in so we can get this to folks the first week of Advent. Friends that are listening and watching, I hope you receive that word of hope, a word of perseverance, a word of encouragement that in an unbelievably difficult season, you may be one of, if not the only people speaking a word of hope into desperate lives of folks filled with despair. And for whatever else may be going on, that is our calling and what we are here to do. And we have the privilege of being about it. And that's a wonderful, wonderful blessing in the midst of a hard calling. And so be encouraged. We're thankful for you. So many of you who watch this and participate give us hope through the ministry you have daily and undoubtedly to many others. So Thank you. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.